This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, today, goodness, we have to talk about the elections.
We do.
Did you vote?
Oh, absolutely. Several times.
I just thought that was a urban thing, an urban legend.
No. Yeah, of course I voted, yes. Every election. Can't imagine missing it, actually. So.
Well, we have another voter with us and an expert at on the Pennsylvania electoral scene, Patti. Dave, welcome to the show.
Great
Dave, you are the president and the CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council, and we've talked with you many times about Pennsylvania politics, and they're getting more interesting as time goes by. Did you vote this?
I did indeed.
Okay, very good.
That's a trick question.
Very good.
There wasn't a whole lot to vote for on some ballots this time around, but nonetheless important to go out.
Yeah.
Well, let's start out with the big race. The big race, of course, was the Democratic race to get the Democratic nomination to run against Governor Corbett in the fall. Any surprises there? What do you think?
No, I think it was pretty anticlimactic. I mean, all the polls certainly showed that Tom Wolf had a commanding lead, and indeed the polls were right. And I think he did everything right. And what I actually admired about his campaign is he did it kind of the old-fashioned way, at least the 1970s, 1980s way, which there was always four phases to a campaign. First, you establish who you are and get people to like you. Second, you establish what the issues are. Third, and only third, do you contrast yourself to other people and on the issues and on your credentials and that kind of thing. Often thought of as the negative campaigning phase. And fourth, of course, you turn out your vote. I don't know that he did a great job in turning out his vote, but he did such a good job in phase one, getting people to know him and like him with those Jeep ads and everything else, that when the others tried to do the negatives, they had not established who they were first. I think in the case of Schwartz and McCord, they may have thought people knew who they were.
They came out swinging.
And they came out swinging, and they say, oh, here's what's wrong with this guy. But they didn't pose themselves as an alternative because people hadn't established who they were. And so Wolf was able to weather those attacks.
Do you think there's anything he needs to do differently as he heads into the challenge against Corbett?
Well, I don't know if I'd say differently, but I don't know that this win, and the number is impressive, don't get me wrong, 58% is very impressive. But remember, only maybe 25% of the Democrat electorate showed up. So he got a little more than half of 25%. So, 13, 14% voted for him. He has to reach out to a broader audience. He really, by self-funding so much, by putting up $10 million of his own money between his money and the loan that he took out personally, getting a $1 million contribution from a friend down the street in York County, getting a lot of other money from family. He didn't raise a whole lot of money from outside his little tiny circle or of friends and family. Now he has to do that. He's never done that before. Picking up the phone and asking for big checks is not easy, and it takes time. I don't know that he's used to interest groups saying, well, we'll support you if, and frankly looking for quid pro quos and guarantees. And he's going to get that as he tries to court labor and other groups that were not with him in the primary. He didn't have the traditional Democrat constituencies. So he has to try and win them over. They're going to want some assurances for him, some things that he's just not accustomed to, may not agree with, maybe didn't think of before. He has a steep learning curve yet.
Last time I checked the statistics, and they may have changed, this may not be the case, but when I looked at the statistics, the results right after the election, he had won every county in the Commonwealth.
Oh, no, it's impressive.
That is quite unique, quite new, and isn't that unprecedented in a primary with contest?
No. I mean, it's unique, but I would point by contrast, I guess it's contrast. But Tom Corbett in 2008, Barack Obama at the top of the ticket. The general election. Now, Morgan Alley, the guy who ran against him for Attorney General, not a household name, in fairness, but in a general election with President Obama at the top of the ticket, Tom Corbett just about took every county. He took more than 60 counties. I forget now off the top of my head, 61, 62 counties that he won. So, running the table is tough and it's impressive, but we've got two guys who've done it. One of them who's done it in the general election. So I think that, I think that they square off. first polls that will be out within days probably will show Tom Wolf in the lead. You always get a bounce from a big victory from the primary and everything like that. Sometime around June, July, they'll start to level off, and we'll see where they really are. And of course, Tom Corbett has a big command in money because he didn't have to spend his in the primary. So it's going to be an interesting race.
Well, a lot of the pundits right now are talking about the fact that the lieutenant governor got more votes than the governor. Colley got more votes across the state than the governor did. Do you think that's significant, or just is it an indication of anything?
Tom Corbett, there are two factors, and the other one I don't know what the numbers are, but what I saw in going through some counties, and I haven't added them all up for all 67 yet, is that there were an awful lot of write-in votes for somebody else on the Republican side for governor. So I don't know who they wrote in. I don't know if some people wrote in Bob Gazzardi, the individual who had filed but then was thrown off the ballots. I don't know if they wrote in Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is always a big vote getter in Pennsylvania, very popular. And I don't know what message they were trying to send. Do they come home? I will tell you, my belief is that, not to take anything away from Tom Wolf and his skills and his credentials and everything else, but if Tom Corbett loses, he'll lose because of Republicans, not because he was outperformed by the other candidate or by Democrats. There are Republicans who are not backing their own governor. And if they stay home, if they vote a different way, Tom Corbett can't win without them.
If you had a horse in this race and you lost, if you were a McGinty supporter, a Schwartz supporter, or a McCord supporter, and you've lost, are you going to come out and vote for Tom Wolf in the fall?
Well, that's a really good question. I was reading a blog post now. I don't know if this individual represents just himself or thousands of voters, but a staunch environmentalist who doesn't like the Marcellus shale industry, doesn't like fracking. And his view, and he had comments posted, so it was more than one person because there were comments posted congratulating him on his view, was a pox on all the Democrats because to the degree that they want to tax Marcellus shale, that means they have to support its existence. And in fact, if you're a true environmentalist, you shouldn't want it to exist in the first place. Now, I wonder how many people are like that. For Wolf, this is what I said, I don't think he owns the Democrat constituency. Here's a guy who has taken all the steps that most business people would take and that I would be fine with, frankly, but to make sure that his staff doesn't go union and to contract out to Indiana that's not particularly union friendly and to move some jobs around and everything else. So I think the unions look at him with a somewhat jaundiced view. The APSCUF was with him, albeit late, and there are a lot of people who jumped on his bandwagon late when it looked like he was going to be the winner, and I get that. That's fine. But PSEA was not. Now they are apparently trying to make nice now, and they sent out a nice congratulatory note and everything in the tweet the other night. But he has the people who voted for those other candidates did so for a reason, and I don't know that he on day one gets their vote. He has the opportunity to earn it.
Well, I've already seen that the governor has started to distinguish himself from Tom Wolf within just a matter of hours. I think
it was almost a prequel there. They were doing it even in advance, right?
But we're going to see more and more of that. What does the governor need to do to distinguish himself at this point?
Well, obviously the power of incumbency, is not to be taken lightly, and he has, in spite of some of the things that didn't get done, I think he has. A good record to run on of making this a place where jobs are coming back. And in fact, we saw that in the most recent jobs report, 23,000 new private sector jobs, an unemployment rate at 5.7%, and it's going to keep getting better. The national economy is getting better. But when you delve into those job reports too, what's interesting is, frankly, in last fall and the winter, some of the first jobs that came back were mostly low-wage jobs, second earner types of work. A smattering at the top as people were rehiring engineers and doctors and that kind of thing. Now it's across the board. Middle wage earner jobs coming back. A really good story to tell in a lot of communities. I happened to spend last week in Western Pennsylvania 5 days in a van going around touring local workforce investment boards with people from the State Department of Labor and Industry. And there is a lot of enthusiasm about what's going on in those Western communities, partly fueled, no pun intended, by the natural gas, but by other industries that are coming in, manufacturing coming back into those areas and saying, hey, we want to place job orders. We need people. So frankly, our problem is the skills gap, which the governor's trying to address. On education, yes, he'll be attacked on education, but look, he keeps putting more money in as it becomes available. It's still a tough economy. But I think people vote their wallets, and I think by this fall, wallets are going to be in decent
Pretty good shape.
Well, politics is perception, and we find that, as you talked about just a moment ago, that first ad that Tom Wolfe ran may have been one of the best television political ads I've ever seen anywhere at any time. I forget who was referring to it as the best political ad they've ever seen.
Yeah. I think
and
Mr. Patti told us about that.
Yeah, no, this was on the national
okay.
level. I saw this reference, and it struck. Oh no, okay, I know where it was. It was this Senator Jubileer on PCN was referring it to as the best political ad he's ever seen. The Republicans in Pennsylvania have a history of having lackluster public relations campaigns or lackluster campaigns when it comes to television.
The Corbett counter ad with Mrs. Corbett doing the voiceover, for starting on camera and then doing a voiceover, and the photos of them with their grandson, and her talking about the governor's concern for education, I thought was a very good counter, very comparable. I don't know what John Brabender has in mind. If I were doing the Corbett ads, I would do some puff pieces, reintroduce him to the voters, not assume that they know who he is and like him. And I would do some more of the soft pieces before I'd start doing contrast. I still like that, as I said in the beginning about Tom Wolfe, first get them to know who you are and like you, then establish the issues, then do the contrast.
Are we going to see ads of him as the prosecutor that put the legislature in order?
I'm not so sure, that didn't warm the cockles of the heart of the legislature. So I'm not sure that he will remind them that he did that. And I think actually that was a valid strategy for the first run, but I do think that going forward, he will say, I'm more than a prosecutor. I can also do these other things.
Okay. Dave, thanks very much for coming around. We want to have you back as the campaign progresses, and we'll be back with a second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this segment, Maura and I are joined by Jim Deitch. Jim is first of all, Jim is a board member for Susquehanna Valley Center and has been for many, many years. And he is the CEO of Teraverde Management Advisors in Lancaster. Can you just take a moment, Jim, to tell us a little bit about Teraverde?
Sure. Teraverde works with financial institutions in a number of ways. One, we work on mortgage loan origination systems. We assist with banks that may have some regulatory remediation needs to be done, and we identify ways for banks to increase their lending and increase their use of deposits.
Okay. And we're here, obviously, you're the right person to come and talk to about residential housing. Mm-hmm. And Maura, you use residential housing, I use residential housing, and it's one of the biggest items in our budget, isn't it?
Well, there certainly are monthly reports on housing and mortgages and median prices of housing. So I think this is great to have you here to talk about, ask the question, are things getting better
and
for everybody?
A huge part of the economy. This is such a large part of the economy and our economic health. What is the state of residential housing in Pennsylvania at this point, Jim?
Okay, well, within Pennsylvania, things are getting better, and housing values remain stable to slightly increasing in some markets. there's pretty robust demand for housing. Interestingly, when you go to the nationwide figures, the Mortgage Bankers Association this week announced that its forecast for new mortgages to be granted in 2014 will be just under $1 trillion. And that
Which sounds good.
It sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But what's happened is that $1 trillion is the lowest level of mortgage origination since 1997, to put that in perspective.
Wow.
Like I said, that's stunning.
Yeah. The high water mark was 2003 with about $3.2, $3.3 trillion. And even last year, 2013, had about $1.9 trillion of loans originated. So what's happening is the refinance market of people benefiting by getting a lower rate and refinancing their mortgage has really dried up. And we can talk about that if you want. But what's happened is refinances have gone from, in 2013, maybe $1.4 trillion. The expectation this year is there'll be $400 to $500 million.
Well, before we go on, what is the reason for that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, those people that can refinance, meaning they have the income, the credit, and the house appraisal to permit refinance, that's a dwindling pool because rates have been so low that there's really not much more downward movement to trigger new refinances.
Okay.
Secondly, there's about 15% of the homeowners in the nation whose home is still underwater, meaning the mortgage is worth, or the debt is more than the house would be worth if you sold it today. And then finally, the full implementation of Dodd-Frank, which occurred on January 10th of this year, has restricted the ability for lenders to make loans that are outside of what's called the qualified mortgage box. So
it sounds like a certain amount of the reason we're going in the other direction is organic or was bound to happen just because of the nature of there being a limited pool of people and dollars available. Is it bad news that this is happening, or is it just something that we need to be aware of or maybe even slightly concerned about?
Well, from my perspective, the housing segment of the economy is such a large segment that it has a material impact on the overall levels of employment and the overall levels of economic activity in the U.S.
Okay.
To the extent that the qualified mortgage requirements have come into play, which have 8 factors that a lender must consider before they make a loan. And the first is to fully document all of the sources of income. And secondly, there are now a hard deck on how much total debt can be paid for each month with respect to an applicant's income. And it's not whether or not you've proven that you can pay more than that 43% debt-to-income ratio which exists. It's now the federal government has said that is the limit of what we would give you in definition for a qualified mortgage. And that has some problems, and it's cutting out the access to credit by a fair number of people, those who have non-traditional jobs. Its impact on minority borrowers has been material, and its impact on young people who might have the ability to grow in to make a payment, but at this present time, you only look at what their historical earnings have been.
Nobody takes a risk on anybody anymore.
No one, by federal law, may take a risk.
Now, I understand homeownership is historically at a interesting low from all time. Is that correct?
Well, I think we've been as high as 66, 67% is how you, depending on how you measure it, and we're down in the lower end of the 60 range.
Okay.
So it's not fallen precipitously, but when you think of it, 3 or 4% on the home ownership percentage represents about 3 or 4 million units. So it's a big regression in the number of people who have at one point been homeowners who are now renters.
Well, to play devil's advocate, can't one say that the economic crisis that was upon us at the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration, was caused by that housing bubble bursting, that there were so many people that were given loans who couldn't pay them, and now could you portray this as we're tightening up a little bit, and if you're not giving loans to people who can't pay them back, that should in the long run be better for our economic health, Jim?
Well, Charlie, I think there's truth in that, but I think you really have to get more granular and look at what has happened to the access to credit. And I fully agree with you that in the 06, 07, 08 era, the access to credit was so easy that people that could not afford it were making purchases that ultimately were just destined for failure.
Yeah.
And
people were buying homes beyond their means.
Right.
And they were living with empty dining rooms and empty
Right.
rooms
Right.
because they couldn't afford to put the furniture in it. Because it was really viewed as an investment. It was almost as if you bought a house and that meant you basically had money in the bank.
Right.
I don't think that is, am I correct that that's not really how people are viewing home ownership now?
I don't think people view home ownership as a flip anymore,
Right, right.
Or an investment per se that you can have as a
Sell
short
later
term.
and-
So the froth that got into the housing market in 06, 07, 08, really the pendulum went over here, where
Right.
virtually anybody could finance a home simply by stating their income, their assets, and no one verified anything. We've kind of swung that pendulum all the way to this side that now says unless you can verify virtually everything, you would not be permitted to have a loan that the federal government has defined as a, quote, qualified mortgage. So somewhere in the middle is probably the right place to be.
Right.
But the impact of swinging this so far to the left is that the access to credit for first-time home buyers, the access to credit for young people who are newly coming out of school with college degrees and college debt, is that it restricts the number of people that can be first-time home buyers. And as a result, first-time home buyers, as a percentage of the market over time, have been about 40%. That number's now in the 23 to 26%, depending upon how you measure it. So you don't have people buying their first home. And because of that, people that want to trade up need a first-time home buyer to come in and buy their home. So there's kind of a downward pressure on purchase transactions because you need to absorb that first-time home buyer inventory in order to let people trade up.
Well, do you think young people are applying and being rejected, or they're just reading enough to know it's not worth even trying?
That's a very interesting question, and I think the answer to that is probably a couple of factors. First, people who have gone to college and have lived through the 06, 07, 08 cycle and seen the carnage that has come from owning a home may say, not right now, I'll wait until a little further down the line. So that's one factor.
If they're paying attention at all,
right,
they're going to know they might want to wait a little bit.
They might want to wait.
Right.
Second, the increase in student debt. There's $1 trillion of student debt sitting out there. So not only when you're looking to buy a home, do you look at what your obligations for credit cards and your mortgage payment are going to be? You have this student debt number that's sitting there. And in some cases, people that are newly graduated have a tremendous amount of debt. Third, it's difficult for newly graduating college seniors to find jobs.
Right.
The employment, and I don't know the exact number, but the employment of people getting out of school is not 100%. No. It's not 100%.
No, that's why they're living in mom and dad's basement.
And then you have what I think a movie called Failure to Launch, that you get out of school but you have debt and you don't have enough income to move and you come back home. Right. So all those factors I think are tamping down the first-time buyer
young
entry into
buying.
it. Right.
Yeah. We only have about 2.5 minutes left, Jim, but I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about the federal government's involvement with mortgages. Of course, they've gotten very involved with healthcare now, and very involved with many segments of the economy. And now we see that they're involved with student loans now, and they're becoming more and more involved with mortgages. And I heard a statistic the other day, I don't remember what it was, but it was a very high percentage of new mortgages were guaranteed in some way, shape, or form. The government was involved with that. Could you shed some light on that situation?
Well, Charlie, about 90% of all new loans are originated and ultimately financed by either Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, FHA. So 90% of the mortgages in America today being made have some form of federal subsidy or support.
Isn't that up from the past?
It's certainly up from where we were in 2005, 6, 7, when the private residential market was maybe doing 25-30%, sometimes even more. But the federal government has really put its hands in the mortgage market in two ways. One, the liquidity, meaning nine out of 10 loans ultimately flow through the federal financing system. The Federal Reserve is buying virtually all the new mortgage backs that are being created to keep rates down. And the regulations of what qualifies for that 90% have been significantly tightened.
Is that a good or bad thing that the government's involved with so many of these mortgages, Jim?
I think the intent is designed to prevent people from buying a home they can't afford. The reality is that it really puts you into a cookie cutter that says if you're a traditional purchaser that has a W-2 job and you've been at your job for 10 years and you have income that progresses at 2-3% a year, it probably makes sense. If you have a non-traditional job, or you have two jobs, or you're a 1099 employee, or you're a contractor, it makes it very difficult for you to demonstrate stable monthly income and qualify for a loan. So it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah, for someone who's self-employed, I've been through that.
Right.
You know, they just don't know what to do with people who are 1099s.
Right.
So, you know, it makes it tough. And a lot of young people, I mean, they're being encouraged to be entrepreneurs and to, you know, try new things if they can't find a job, and it might not help them in terms of home ownership.
In the last 45 seconds to 30 seconds, the Obama administration has talked about eliminating the deductibility of mortgage interest payments that one makes through the year. Is that going to happen? And if it does, what will be the effect on the economy in the last 30 seconds?
You know, that has been a proposal for the last 6-7 years. I don't know whether or not it will happen. What it will do is, if the deductibility of interest is taken away, is it will have a depressing effect on the value of homes and potentially start another cycle of falling housing prices, and we've seen the impact of that, which is not good.
Okay. Wow. Jim, we want to thank you very much for being with us today, and we look forward to you coming back and talking a little bit more about housing in the future.
Great.
And we will be with you again right here on your dial. Please be tuning in to Behind the Headlines. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.